Hello, welcome to Shot Chronicles. Today we're going to discuss the 5 rules of gun safety. Now, whenever you go to a gun range, the first thing you're going to notice is they're going to give you a range safety brief. And they're also going to show you a big poster with all the rules for that gun range. The problem that I have with that is they're not consistent. You can go to 10 different ranges and you have different rules. The first 5 are always present in all rules. But some have 5 rules, some have 10 rules, some have 20 rules. It's tough enough being a novice shooter trying to keep yourself from shooting yourself in the foot or somebody else. Now you have to memorize 10, 15, 20 rules. If I could make a suggestion, I recommend the 5 rules of gun safety be the following. The first one is to keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target. What that basically means is this is a typical gun. Now this gun, I have rendered it inert. It cannot shoot. Although it has a magazine and it has a slide, the barrel has been plugged. So I cannot load it with ammunition and fire it. I've also removed the firing pin. This is the extractor and the firing pin back there. So it can't fire no matter what I do. I could load bullets in this, put it in the magazine, and it will not fire. No matter what I do, it just simply will not chamber around. That's all it'll do is there. That's the only motion. You pull trigger, the trigger is inert. So I use this as a training gun. I suggest you do the same. If you have an old gun that doesn't work, that's broken, don't just get rid of it. Use it as a trainer. I painted this one red so I can identify it as a trainer for my other guns. The other thing you can do is you can buy yourself a toy gun. A toy gun that has all the moving parts similar to a gun that you carry for personal protection. That way you could practice your dry firing, your draw, and nobody in your household is going to be freaking out about, hey, you're pointing a loaded gun at somebody. Okay, now to the rules of gun safety. The first one, again, is to keep your finger off the trigger till your sights are on the target. Well, this is your trigger finger. This here is your trigger guard, and that in there is the trigger. A lot of people will put their finger right here, and this is called trigger finger discipline. By putting your finger here or here, which is a higher carry, by doing it this way, you notice that there's nothing, your finger does not make contact with the trigger. So you couldn't possibly fire this gun. Most people who have accidental discharges are not real accidents. They're negligent discharges because somewhere along the course of action, they put their finger on the trigger and pulled the trigger, which caused the gun to discharge. That's a negligent discharge, not an accidental discharge. For it to be an accidental discharge, it would have to fire without you ever coming in contact with the trigger. That, like a mechanical failure, for example, that would be an accidental discharge. So, keeping your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target means, basically, when you draw your gun out of the holster and you go into a presentation, you get ready to point the gun forward, and as you aiming the gun downrange, see you got your front sight post here, your rear sight aperture here, so you're aiming down there, then and only then do I put the finger on the trigger. As long as that front sight is on my target, I can keep my finger on the trigger because I'm ready to shoot. If I decide I'm not going to shoot, I take my finger off the trigger. As you can see, my finger comes out right there, and then I could take the gun and pull it back or holster it. But the sights go on target first, the trigger goes in the trigger guard second. You never put your finger on the trigger until you are ready to shoot. That is the first rule of gun safety. The second rule of gun safety is to never allow the muzzle of your weapon. This is this part right here. This is called the muzzle, the part that I'm holding on. This is the dangerous end. Never allow this part of the gun to cover something you're not willing to shoot, to destroy, to put a bullet in. Don't sweep anybody with it. By sweeping, what is sweeping? Sweeping is when, let's say there's a person standing here and I'm fumbling with this gun. As I sweep to the right and sweep to the left, everyone that this muzzle clears, like I'm sweeping over my finger. Let's pretend this is an individual. Well, I am now muzzle sweeping him, going back and forth with the sweeping motion, and I'm basically covering him with the muzzle of my gun. If the gun goes bang, I shoot him. Muzzle sweeping makes people extremely uncomfortable. It's a good way to get yelled at. So remember, never point your gun at anything you're not willing to shoot. That's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is be sure of your target and what is beyond it. Basically what that means is let's say you go out in the woods, you want to do some target shooting. You set up a few beer cans, you take out your little 22 pistol, you're getting ready to go plink. Take the gun out of the holster, point down the range, pull trigger, right? Wrong. You don't do that. What you have to do is you have to remember that when you fire that bullet and that bullet hits your target, whether it be a paper target or a beer can, you shouldn't be using beer cans if you have a gun, but a soda can or anything like that, the bullet doesn't stop there. It keeps going through that target several hundred yards down range before it hits something. You are ultimately responsible for the final resting place of every bullet you fire. Therefore, after your bullet goes through that target, if it goes down range, it hits somebody, say a half a mile down the tree line, you're liable for them being shot. And you could go to prison for murder, manslaughter, you could damage the vehicle, put a bullet hole through somebody's house, you could shoot into a schoolyard. There's no telling. So never, ever, ever fire a gun at a target unless you know what's beyond it. Make sure that you have a dirt hill as a backstop to trap the bullets. Don't use something hard like a rock wall or boulder, because bullets bounce off, ricochet, they can hit anyone, including you. You shoot into something that's going to give a soft dirt to capture the bullet, to trap it. That would be a decent backstop. So remember, be sure of your target and what is beyond it. Be sure of your target and what beyond it also means make sure you know what you're shooting at. What I mean by that is you never shoot at a sound, you never shoot at a movement, you never shoot at a shape. You have to be able to positively identify what you are shooting at. Here's an example. Let's say you're with your family or your kids at 2 o'clock in the morning. You hear a noise, somebody and a sound of broken glass. You think, oh my God, somebody's breaking into my home. You grab your gun, you go out into the living room, you see somebody in the living room. You don't know who it is because it's dark, but you know it's 2 o'clock in the morning. There's a strange man in my house. You point the gun at him, you fire. Guess what? You just killed your mom or your dad or your husband because you did not positively identify it. Maybe a child of yours, that's who you just shot. So best thing to do is turn on the light. Use a flashlight. You do something to be able to absolutely, with no uncertain terms, positively identify what you're shooting at. So the third rule of gun safety is be sure of your target and what is behind it. Okay. Number 4, never put your hands on a gun that you're not familiar with. If you see a gun laying down somewhere on a countertop somewhere and you're curious about that gun, don't just pick it up, because if you don't know anything about that gun, you might touch something that might make it go off. Like the trigger, for example. You might decide, well, let me unload it. In your process of getting unloaded, it might go off. If you're not thoroughly familiar with a firearm, get somebody who is thoroughly familiar to train you on that particular gun before you go putting your hands on it. Okay. The 5th and final one is treat every gun as if it was a loaded gun. This is one of the most important of them all. If you have a round in the chamber and you put your gun down on a nightstand and you get up and go to the bathroom, you know your gun is unsafe, but there's a round in the chamber. You come back and you pick up that gun. Somebody has manipulated the gun after you've left. Maybe they've emptied the gun. Maybe they've rechambered on the second round. We don't know. But let's say you pulled the trigger for some reason or another, thinking the gun was unloaded or thinking it's unsafe. Well, the gun goes bang. What if you have a gun that you know it's empty? You just went like this. You took the magazine out. You put it to the side. You come back. You pick up the gun and you pull the trigger and it goes bang again. Why did that happen? Because you did not treat the gun as if it was loaded. Every gun is a loaded gun until you check it. When somebody hands you a gun, even though they're handing you an empty gun, you always pull it to the rear, check the chamber to make sure there's nothing in the chamber, check the magazine well to make sure there's nothing in the magazine. When you remove the magazine and you lock the slide to the rear and there's no round in the chamber, there's no round in the magazine well, this is a complete safe weapon. This weapon is unloaded. Now, I can take this gun, lay it down on the countertop, walk away from it. I come back to it, I have to consider that gun a loaded gun again. Why? Because even though I had unloaded it, I don't know if somebody went behind me, took this magazine, put it in there, right? Put the magazine in, chambered around, and now it's a loaded gun, and put it back. Then I come on there not being aware that it's loaded because, hey, it's not loaded, I just unloaded it. Pull the trigger, gun goes bang, and I just put a bullet in my ceiling. That can happen to anybody. That is not an accident. That is a negligent discharge because you picked up the gun and you didn't do a chamber check. You didn't go in there and pull the chamber to the rear to make sure, hey, this gun is completely safe. So therefore, you've had a negligent discharge. So remember, treat every gun as it's loaded, not if it was empty. Every time you hear somebody having a mishap where they accidentally shoot somebody, allegedly accidental discharge, first words out of their mouth is, I thought that gun was unloaded. Well, you could have solved that problem. It's if you pick it up, you take the magazine out, you pull the slide to the rear, and physically check to make sure it's empty. Now I know this gun is unloaded. Pull the trigger all I want, it can't go off because it's unloaded. So the fifth rule of gun safety is treat every gun as if it was unloaded. Okay. To recap, first rule is keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target. Rule number 2, never point the gun at something you do not intend to shoot. Rule number 3, be sure of your target and what is beyond it. Rule number 4, never handle a firearm you are not completely and thoroughly familiar with. Rule number 5, treat every gun as if it was a loaded gun. If you violate one of these rules, odds are you might make a mess and make noise, but you won't kill somebody. It takes violating a pile of these rules, 2 or 3 or more, to have a fatality. Remember, you are physically responsible for the final resting place of every bullet that you've discharged. If you like this video, please click on subscribe, and also please make a comment. Click on the comment section. I read all the comments. I may not answer them all, but I will definitely read them all. Now, thank you so very much for watching Shot Chronicles. Have a great day.